Let's show some video of the Money 2020 event, our impressions. Okay, welcome back. So on my left, probably your right, is Peter Eikelboom, Innovation Manager at Volksbank. Thanks for joining us. For you only an hour drive, so much easier than for Andrea. And on my other side is my co-founder, Wil Janssen, also joining the discussion on trends. The reason to do this, why we put this on the agenda, is because there was the big Money 2020 Europe event, more or less in our backyard, and one of the primary fintech or financial events around. We saw the video, right? It's about money, and as you can see in the video, a lot of money is spent at it. I have to say, it's one of the more luxurious and expensive events we go to. Of course, if you have Money 2020 in the title, then some money has to be spent. But there was also Identity Week, which is a wider event, not only at the financial sector, but also at a lot of government, especially there, and passport printers, etc. Which we also attended, and which also gave us some insight into trends that are going on. Again, questions or comments, please feel free to use the chat. Let me start with Peter. So Money 2020 is about money, but it's also about much more. So so what else did you see there?
Yes, when I look back for myself, I think two major themes that are there. Of course, it's about money. It's about the old money around payments. It's of course about the new money, about CBDCs, the digital euro that's coming. But the other big theme was more about data, the data sharing economy that is emerging. Around EIDs, data sharing, and the ecosystem that's around it. It's a trusted ecosystem, so that has some similarities with money, with payments. So that's quite obvious why that was also a big theme on that conference.
Okay. And Wil, what did you see?
Indeed, you saw kind of a blurring of roles. Banks used to be banks, and now suddenly, and banks have their suppliers. There was a lot of attention also on identity verification. I didn't visit earlier events, but some people that were regular visitors actually spoke about the tsunami of identity verification solutions in the market. Lots of AI and biometry, and also finally growing recognition of the importance of NFC. But in general, the field of the roles involved in the value chain, a lot of discussion on that. How are roles now changing under, for example, the EIDAS revision? How are roles changing under the growing importance of data? So that was what struck me. New players, new roles, and a bit of also. Maybe even worries or discussion on what will be my next role as a bank, as a supplier, as an identity verification party, as a credit card company.
Yeah, I think that's quite a logical question, because I already mentioned it, that around payments there is a trusted ecosystem about exchanging and storage of money. And I think you could ask the same questions around data. You need a trusted ecosystem in exchanging and storing your data. So the interesting question for banks is, we are of course a money custodian. Are we also becoming a data custodian? And that's the strategic question that's asked there by consultancy companies like InnoPay.
So can you also answer that question?
I think it's a quite interesting question, because of course already when you talk about payments, and identity is involved. You need to know who is paying whom. So I think there is already, when you look back in the history of banks, when you become a customer, we just talked about it with Andrea, we need to know who you are. So the identity case and payment case is quite close to us. The new area is around data sharing, and that's of course much broader than only financial data. And that's the interesting thing. That's also is a question about around the European level. Of course, before the summer, the European Union declared that we should work on a digital identity framework, and that the member states should provide an EID and certify data wallets. And then is the interesting question: who is going to provide such a data wallet? And that could be banks.
Yeah, because I don't mention them. I think they are forcing banks to accept them. They're not necessarily saying banks should supply them.
Correct.
Yeah. So, but if you look at it a little bit closer to home, right? So, banks have, of course, and as Andrea explained, in New Zealand somewhat different than in Europe, right? Europe we have the AML directives, and that's some certain things in New Zealand have a more specific rule on how to do know your customer. Yeah, with 2 pieces of evidence or a highly trusted source, but I think the general thing is all over the world. Yeah, there is some form of regulation put on banks on how to know your customer, which is a huge cost, right? And at least in Europe, not only in spending money on doing that, but also paying the regulators anytime you screw up as a bank, right? So, which is very, very significant money. To be honest, when I was still more in sales, I would talk to a bank, and they would be in risk of such a penalty, right? Selling them ReadID wasn't a big problem because the license we ask is orders of magnitude less than the fine it would get. But that's a cost. But can it be? Is it just a cost, or is it a revenue, or should banks just then accept that from? They could stop doing that and just accept it from the wallets, right? And kind of get rid of that whole industry or that whole departments that do know your customer.
Yeah.
Or
I think it's both. Of course, normally you start at what you also were starting at some processes, KYC processes. Could be much more easier when you have this kind of digital verification of your ID. There are a lot of processes within the bank that needs a lot of data. For instance, the mortgage process, you need to check a lot of data. It should be much easier and cost efficiency when you could check that data electronically and verify that data. So that's also a business case. Andrea was talking about AML, of course, the fraud side or the more identified communication. Do I really talk to Will from a distance when I chat or when I answer a phone call? That's one side. The other side is more interesting even. Are there some new value propositions within the bank possible? For instance, when you talk about, for instance, sustainable mortgages, you of course talk about, we can finance your solar panels. But in the Netherlands, we have a smart meter in every house that's also producing data. So you also, when you connect that smart meter data to your proposition, then you can make that proposition much richer, and then you can think of new propositions that are not possible in the current days. And when you look even more broader, I think that new, we're calling it that new data sharing economy, is broader than finance. So I think this is a solution that is beneficial for everybody. And then you could also say, okay, maybe there are some use cases that are outside the financial area, and that could support if we want to play a role in this new data economy.
Yeah, and this is of course, in my view, a very old discussion. Yeah, which is now getting more traction, right, and more attention. Yeah. If you look a little bit again with the European perspective, we have the Scandinavian countries which have a bank ID or similar concept already for a long time, where banks kind of share their at least part of the identity verification infrastructure, and then hand that over as a service to others with high in the 90% coverage. In the Netherlands, we have a slightly more modest version of this IDIN. Which banks don't trust each other, but they do ask the industry to trust them. Yep. Yeah, so to use IDIN as a way to log in, as a kind of like a bank-owned alternative to DigiD, which you cannot use in the Netherlands in the private sector. So do you think, because IDIN is like kind of a step in that direction, right? Of course, the ambition now is much wider than just this basic identity attributes. But so, do you think EIDIN is a success, and is that, or do you think it's a failure? Do you think that you should just expand upon EIDIN, or is it something very different? And am I thinking way too narrow here?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. I think you could say that EIDIN is a first step in that direction to try what is possible, to see what you have already, what kind of data you have in store that you can share with other companies. And I think there are two main things that are changing. Of course, now we have identity data, but that identity data, the true source is, of course, the government. So when the government is providing a real EID, I think that's the real ID you want to share across to other parties. And of course, there could be means like a data wallet that it is provided by. And the other thing is that I think we also discussed that internally. I think EIDIN, when you're talking about innovation, a lot of innovation in a certain time needs some pivots to be right on track again. And I think we are now in a moment that EIDIN needs a pivot to be on track again with the new regulations that the EU is providing, and the combination between EID and data sharing.
Yeah, so I saw a lot of hesitation also in really embracing a different role for a bank in terms of becoming an identity provider or the data provider. So everybody was talking about a lot of buzz going on also, well, especially in relation to the EU regulation. But nobody really publicly was embracing it. And if you saw initiatives in that field, it was always under a sub-label or a spin-off. So a lot of banks working on it, doing experiments, or even launching products. For example, like Rabobank with DataKeeper, that were our guest earlier on. ING had Cop ID for a similar version, but then oriented towards companies. But not really publicly embracing the fact that they could fulfill such a role. So really making sure that their responsibilities as a bank, the responsibilities from kind of a new field, are separated, which maybe is a good thing. But then also, a lot of banks were looking at how their suppliers and their identity suppliers would evolve. A lot of attention, for example, around It's Me, which is growing fast in Belgium and also expanding to other countries now. So also looking at other parties to supply that role, and in fact how that ecosystem, a lot of interest in how that ecosystem will evolve without any decisive answers.
I think that's important to mention, that it is an ecosystem, so we have to work together to make this happen. And you could ask what role wants a bank to play in that ecosystem, and there are different roles in that ecosystem. I think there will be different wallets. You already mentioned some of the wallets, and then it's an interesting question: will there be one wallet for every bank, or do we have more a common wallet which you could use? That's an interesting question. But next to the wallet, there's of course the question: who is going to provide the infrastructure beneath it? Because you're also, with data, you're talking about some kind of transaction that is happening, and you want to verify that thing, and it has to be trusted. So there are different roles we have to make work together, and it's interesting to see which role which company is taking. And ideally, it's an open ecosystem, so that multiple organizations can work together to make this thing happen. Because I already mentioned it, that when this is happening, it has benefits for a lot of companies on the side, where you can check very easily your EID, where you very easily can receive validated data and do some things like electronic signatures or electronic signing. So that's I think also necessary in these times of COVID, that you can arrange your affairs from a distance.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, the basic signing and identity verification, to be honest, I think is kind of a solved problem, right? I mean, it's there. You can do it today, right? And so but yeah, I think it's the next step that's fascinating here. When you look at really the long-term trends, right? On the short term, I think this is kind of a solved issue in my view. But I was thinking about, and I'm sure you've, so Dave Birch has this identity is the new money thing, right? So he put that a couple of years out there. And I think he's very right in that if you do payments, if you have the identity, then the payment becomes trivial, right? So it's like 80% of the problem you've solved. Does that mean for banks that if they don't become the identity provider, so if that's a government EID or something else, someone else does that the payment is no longer a valid service for banks? Will that be jeopardizing for their core of their existence? Will they have to pivot, or is it just a nice new business model?
Of course, banking is more than payments, and payments is an important part, and payments is more than a payment. We already discussed that. And of course, you already see trends that other parties, like the big techs, are providing wallets. That is also supporting a nice way of doing your payments. Still with your bank, dus not with Apple, but with your bank. That's
the word. Still.
Yeah, it's an interesting time to see. But I believe last week, I heard it from your Will that even Google was saying, okay, I don't want to become a full-fledged bank, because what I was saying, banking is more than payments. When you're talking about mortgages, lending, you're also talking about a lot of risk, regulations, all that kind of stuff. You have to provide and to be good at. And I think the answer will be somewhere in the middle, that you have to. Ideally, this is an ecosystem where when you provide some kind of service in the customer journey, Andrea was also talking about that makes your life easier, then that should of course be part, and probably that will be a success to use next to payments. But on the other hand, you really want to be sure that the payment is made, so everything beneath the surface also has to be run smoothly, and
so it's not 80%, it's 50% of maybe what you have to do. So that there's still some significant value add on top of identity to do payment, and of course there's lending, etc. Different story, right? So that's
I don't know if we want to discuss the direction, but I think then there is an interesting more discussion about CBDCs when you talk about digital money.
So explain that. I'm sure not everyone in the audience knows this, so explain that a little.
I compare it that the current way of payments is more like posting a letter. It's about settlement, so you're doing that in the mailbox. It's going to the other party, and there you receive the letter. And that's more or less the way that the current payment system is working. And when you talk about CBDCs, it's a digital variant of cash. Then normally when I give cash to Will, that's the payment. So when you have a digital currency, you can, in theory, you don't need to have a bank account. You can pay with your digital euros, and that's so it could be the banks in that area can play a role, but are not essentially for playing a role. So that's.
And then, of course, So then, at least the questions that I have is what about privacy? What about scalability? And what's the role? I
think you have the same questions over there. When the digital currency from China is completely monitored, hopefully the digital euro has some privacy regulations around it, so that you with a lot of solutions you can make it more centralized and more monitored, and you could of course make it a bit more decentralized and more privacy friendly. And hopefully that's the way we are going in Europe, not only with data but also with your money.
So you have is this 1 year away or 3 years, or is it here already and I just didn't notice?
No, we talked about Money 2020, and the first thing you do is take your phone, because there were 5,000 people. The first thing you did was take your phone, open your wallet, your ChronaCheck wallet, and provide your credential, your proof that you're healthy, and that's already a first step in that direction, that you are in control where you can enter or not can enter. And I think that will expand to what we were talking about. Why don't I have a digital variant of my passport? Why do I always have to carry this thing around with me? Hopefully that could be on my phone or even on my watch when I have to enter somewhere. And it's the same with data sharing. when I have to fill in all those forms, why all the data is electronically available? Why can I share with a couple of clicks my data? And the last thing around signing, why is that impossible that I can agree to something from a distance?
That's impossible maybe in the Netherlands, but that's more a Dutch thing. I think some other countries have solved that already. Without needing new regulations there or new technology.
Yes, of course, but you say it solved it, but I think the combination makes it powerful. You already mentioned it, it's me in Belgium. You see there that when they combine in a wallet different stuff, and it's supported by the government, banks and telcos, so you have a large enough reach, then you see it's really taking off.
The chicken egg problem here is immense, right? And requires, again, an ecosystem. It requires a consortium of parties. And
we are back to.
I've worked on some of them and failed in all of them. But that doesn't mean that it will happen. It's just a question of when and how.
I think you had the same in the past, the same discussion around mobile. There was a lot of years. Mobile is coming, and until Apple solved the problem about the smartphone, and from that day on, you saw it. Mobile is really coming, and I think it's here the same. On one hand, this mobile phone is playing a role, and of course, on the other hand, when you have the right legislation from the EU and from the country, then also you can take off. And I think we are now in that moment in the Netherlands.
Okay. So Andrea, you're still on. So do you have any thoughts on this? What do you think? Do you see this happening in New Zealand as well? We don't hear you.
Just trying to. Yep. Sorry, just unmuting. So we are working. We do already have a local government digital identity solution. There's been not great uptake of that solution, and one of the frustrations for us as a potential end user of that solution is the fact that we don't obtain a photo. So we to use that solution, we would pass the customer off to complete their identity verification, return that to us, but we don't end up with a photo. And that was one of the big attractions for us for the NFC solution, obviously, is to get that high quality resolution photo that we can use in the future for sort of fraud investigation purposes. So we are working on also a brand new digital identity framework at this point in time, but really we're still very much at the framework stage. So, haven't even got to sort of looking at legislation. So we're certainly not waiting for that. We can't afford to wait for that.
Yeah, and I think that's always a good idea. Don't wait, right? So, waiting that's not necessarily the best solution. I think you might. We have Peter's innovation manager probably. So sometimes you have to just try an experiment with something. It's just that some experiments are very complex and expensive, and some are easier. So you try to pick the easier ones. Quick fail, quick win. But the don't wait, and sometimes the devil is in the detail, right? So so if in New Zealand they would share that photograph, that would be a much more attractive proposition from a bank perspective to use that service. But not right. I don't have an opinion on the specific case whether that makes sense here, but sometimes the devil is in the detail. And not in the intention, and that makes it also very complex, right?
Maybe in terms of that waiting, that is one of the things that worries me a little bit. Is that now government has a different angle of the government. European government is playing a role in that identity and wallet and EID framework, moving towards the banks, moving towards other data sharing companies, and there's a lot of people really with large interest looking at what the government will be doing or the European Commission will be doing. But still, they weren't, for example, at Money 2020. Only some people from, for example, the Italian government were there. And if the expectations are high and the European Commission in this federated world cannot live up to those expectations, it might even stall the development a little bit instead of speeding it up. So I really like the ambitions that were formulated, but I'm a bit worried that the European Commission might not be able to live up to those expectations, and we'll run into delays.
Zoom a little bit on pivoting, right? IDAS, the European regulation that one country has to accept this identity of another country. Mm-hmm. it's not been a huge success, right? I'm understating here a little bit, right? So, so to a certain extent, this new version that we or they are working on, is also an attempt, I think, to try to save that investment, because as a taxpayer, we spent lots of money on it. And we could have, rented a Ferrari and drove everyone over there, right, to do the identity verification in person. If you look at the cost and the amount of usage that IDAS currently has, right? So, for either one of you, do you think that this will save IDAS? Will this, or am I just a too impatient person and IDAS is not a failure? It's just taking a little bit longer than we thought it would.
My opinion is probably the latest one. I think when we just experienced COVID, of course, and you see that there's really a sense of urgency that we need to fix some things where we are now depending on the physical world. And when we talk to the government, you also see that now we are seeing the reason why we have to do some things. And the other thing is what we discussed earlier on is, my opinion, the government isn't doing things when there is no regulation in place, and I think those two are coming in place. So there's a pressure from the European Union. We get the WDO, in the Dutch law around digital identity this summer, and hopefully from that day on, when we talk to the government, you see they're also making plans. So in the next year we should provide, hopefully, together some kind of test environment where we can all connect and test and see if the way we want to make this work is also valid with regulations. And hopefully from that the day on, year on, we make steps towards more implementation of these things, of these APIs, of this data from the government, because that's the main reason. When we don't have data, this whole thing isn't flying. So we need some data to start this making progress.
Yeah, and that's also, but again, personal opinion is maybe the government should do more on a lead by example, right? Giving that data out there, and then you can adapt to another standard. Yeah. That's not so difficult. Yeah. So if you pick the wrong one, you do another one, or you do two. Yeah, as long as it's not 100, it's fine. And and just get it out. So the chicken egg problem doesn't have to be a regulation, right? Or lots of meetings or a new law. The chicken egg problem can just make that data available. Yeah. That as a citizen I should have a right to, but is now hidden behind phone calls, weird logins, strange PDFs instead of a proper JSON that I can upload and download in my wallet or somewhere else as I please.
Yeah, and possibly I do hope and I do think indeed that this type of vision as presented by the European Commission will put the pressure also on the national governments to go towards that direction and to especially to give up their resistance in moving in that direction.
Or at least to 3 years of consultants talking about this and nothing changing.
Yeah, that could also be. About things not changing and consultants talk. One positive thing also about Money 2020 that I really would like to mention, I didn't hear the blockchain word anymore. Hardly ever. So that's finally the people start to realize, well, blockchain is just a technology. It's maybe a bit mysterious, but it was not in any poster or in any talk or whatever. So we're beyond the...
So let's hope that the same thing doesn't happen to wallets. Which, by the way, I don't believe, right? I'm a much bigger fan of wallets, identity wallets, than I ever was on blockchain. So let's do because we're closing in into the end, so let's do a small round if there's any last thoughts or ideas. Andrea, you're the furthest away, so you go first. Any last thoughts or ideas on this subject, trends, identity verification, or am I just catching you by surprise? And
No, really just, I guess, to sort of finish off and say, we're so happy with the solution that we've implemented. We had a fair bit of pain with our previous solution, and I think the expertise that ReadID were able to demonstrate with the work that they've done, particularly with the Home Office in the UK, we were able to get a proof of concept up and running really quickly, and also implement very quickly, and that's just been amazing for us.
Thank you very much for those kind words. And we never waited for any government or new regulation for this, right? We just did it. And that's one of my points, right? So some things might require a big discussion, but some things you can just do now, right? And already a step in that same direction. Peter.
No, I want to close off with the thing we discussed, that this is an ecosystem and we have to work together to make this happen. We already discussed the role of the government, but also to say that hopefully banks can play a role in this ecosystem to really make this happen and to have benefits for the customers, for the organizations, and for the broader for the countries involved in this.
Yeah, and I fully agree. And I think any of these solutions to solve the chicken egg problem, if it's more than a point solution for one bank, it means you need coverage, right? Yeah. And there is not, So banks have to play nice together, right? And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. And I'm hoping in this, and of course in the Netherlands at least has a bad history of banks playing nice with telcos. Yeah. So, but if it's just banks, there's precedence that this can work very well. And in this case, actually, it should be worldwide scale, I think, even.
Yeah, we have good discussions about that. So that's already said that it is not a thing from one bank, but it's more a service from the banks, I think.
Last but not least, Wil?
Yeah, let's take it a bit closer to home for us. I'm very pleased to see that. I was very pleased to see at Money20 that identity verification is now taken very seriously. It's not just something you need to do to comply. No, it's really the first start of a customer journey where you have to be sure on who you're dealing with and exploiting that data, that information further in the customer journey. So. Not the final solution yet. A lot of attention for NFC in combination with biometrics, finally. So very pleased that identity verification is taken really as an asset, not as a compliance issue only.
Yeah, and it's the cornerstone of any wallet, I think. Yeah. So and to be honest, so we get this passport from the government, right? It has a chip. It's already an electronic identifier. Yeah, and it's out there. It's already decentralized. I carry it around in my pocket. Yeah, and what with ReadID, what we try to do is bridge that to the mobile, right? So to allow you this decentralized identity that you carry around, put it in your other decentralized identity, the wallet, and it doesn't require any regulation or change or big discussion. It's something we can do today, as Andrea explained. We did in New Zealand, already, but also for the Volksbank, for example.
Yeah, I mean, move away from the technology. I think the thing you want to achieve here is to empower you as an individual, that you are able to be yourself in the digital world, and that the things that are now working in the physical world are also working for you in the digital world.
Great. So let me really wrap this up. So thanks, Andrea and Peter, for joining us. For this interesting webinar. There will be recordings online for people that registered, and maybe they'll also appear at some point in time on our website. So everyone stay healthy, and I hope that everyone we go into a post-COVID world where we can also have more face-to-face meetings like Money 2020 and Identity Week. And thank you all, and have for Andrea, good evening, and for the people closer to here, a good day. Bye bye.